Welcome to Oracle Software Installation. In this chapter, we are going to plan your installation, create the required operating system users and groups, describe the minimum requirements for installing Oracle Software database. Last thing, install the database software in Linux environment. Planning your installation. What Oracle software are you installing? So before you try to install the software on a Linux environment or Windows environment, you have to download the correct media for your platform. For example, if you plan to install Oracle Database 12c on Linux environment 64-bit, you have to download the correct media for Linux 64-bit. If you plan, for example, to use Enterprise Edition, there is a specific media for Enterprise Edition. If we are planning to use Standard Edition, there is a media for Standard Edition. Same as also for Windows environment, there is a media Enterprise Edition 12c for Windows 64-bit. There is also Enterprise Edition for Windows 32-bit. There is also media Standard Edition for Windows 64-bit, and so on. So you have to be careful when you download the media from Oracle website. Does the hardware involved meet the minimum required specification? So each software has a minimum requirements that must be met before trying to install that software on the operating system, like for example minimum RAM size, minimum disk space, minimum CPU speed, and so on. Is there a recommended order of installation when multiple products are involved? For example, if you try to use Oracle RAC database, before using Oracle RAC database, you have to first install Oracle Grid infrastructure, and then install Oracle database software, and then you can create Oracle RAC database. So depends on the software that you are trying to use, there is an order of software installation you have to take care of. Are there prerequisite steps that must be performed by someone other than the DBA? For example, if you try to install Oracle database software on operating system like Linux and Unix environments, there is some prerequisites that must be met. For example, there is specific packages that must be installed on Linux or Unix environment. For example, operating system users, operating system groups that must be created. There is, for example, kernel settings, shell limits, and so on. So these are prerequisites must be performed by the operating system engineer. Creating operating system groups and users. Create custom configuration groups and users based on job role separation. So before starting database installation on Linux and Unix environments, there are some groups and users must be created before starting the installation. The first group called oInstall group. oInstall group, this group will own Oracle inventory directory structure. So Oracle inventory directory structure is a directory location that contains information about all Oracle homes installed on the server and all patch levels applied on the Oracle home. The second group, which is called standard Oracle database groups, which is the DBA and OPER. DBA and OPER means any operating system user part of DBA group can connect to the database as sysdba user without username and password as sysdba user. This is called operating system authentication. OPER group, this group means any operating system user can connect to the database as sysoper without username and password. The three other groups, these groups introduced in 12c. This is only in 12c and later. So these groups for separation of duties. The first one, which is backup DBA group. So you have to create an operating system group called backup DBA. This group, any operating system part of the backup DBA group can connect to the database as sys backup without any username and password. As sys backup without username and password. He can connect to the database as sys backup without username and password, and he can do backup operation like backup, recover, restore, and so on. Another group called DGDBA, which is DataGuard DBA. This is also introduced in 12c. Any operating system part of this group can connect to the database as sysdg, and he can do data guard operation like switchover, failover, and so on. Another group called KMDBA stands for Key Management DBA. Any operating system user part of this group can connect to the database as syskm. He then can manage the credential stores. He can create master keys, and he can also create encryptions and do the encryption. Last thing, which is users. The users, which is there's only one required user, which is called Oracle. This Oracle will own the Oracle software installation. Environment variables. There are two environment variables important for Oracle database. The first one, which is called Oracle base. The second one, which is called Oracle home. Oracle base, which is the root directory structure for Oracle databases. Oracle home, which is the Oracle database software installation location. So during the wizard of Oracle database installation, you have to choose the location of Oracle base and Oracle home. Usually Oracle home is a subdirectory from the Oracle base. System requirements, Oracle database installation. So before starting the installation of Oracle database software on the target server, your target server must have the following minimum requirements. The first one, which is memory requirements, minimum 1 gigabyte, 2 gigabyte recommended for database instance. But if you plan to create a database, for example, with 20 giga SGA and 10 giga SGA, you have to consider this in your RAM size. The swap space depends on the RAM size. If your RAM size between 1 giga to 2 giga, swap space should be 1.5 times the size of the RAM. If your RAM between 2 giga to 16 giga, the swap space should be equal to the size of the RAM. If the memory size is greater than 16 gigabyte, the swap space should be equal to 16 gigabyte. Another minimum requirements for disk space, which is 6.4 giga for Oracle database software installation, 1 giga for the /temp, and another requirements for the fast recovery area. Fast recovery area here, which is the default location for backups and archives. Default location of backups and archive. We will discuss later on what's the fast recovery area and how to configure fast recovery area later on. So you have to consider sizing the fast recovery area correctly. It depends on the size of your backup and the archives, and for how long you retain your backups and archives. Types of installation. During running the setup of Oracle database software installation, you will face three installation types. The first one, which is install and configure a database, or install and create a database. During this option, you will set up Oracle database software installation and create a database in one shot. The second one, which is called software only installation, you will install only Oracle software without creating a database. The last one, which is upgrade existing database. If you plan to upgrade an existing database, for example 11G, if you have 11G database, you can choose option 3. So in this chapter, we plan your installation, we create an operating system, required users and groups, and describe the minimum requirements for installing Oracle database software in terms of RAM and disk space, and last thing, install the Oracle database software. The practice of this chapter, we will install Oracle database software 12c on a Linux environment. Thank you for watching, and I hope this video was informative for you.